makes me smile looking at Shelley.
Kia ora koutou. Nā mai haere mai and welcome to this council meeting of Thursday the 14th of December, the final council meeting for 2023. So I'd like to start by wishing everybody a very Merry Christmas and a relaxing break over the summer. I'd like to thank our Democracy Services team, particularly Steffi, whose birthday it is today. Happy birthday, Steffi. I'd like to thank the Happy birthday, dear Steffi. Happy birthday to you. I'd like to thank the Chief Executive, whose birthday it isn't today, thankfully, and the whole council staff team for the enormous amount of work that's gone in this year. What a fantastic year we've had, particularly launching our Vision Kapiti work as we plan for the future. But so much has been happening. I'd like to congratulate Sean's team too on the wonderful stormwater work that's been happening. We all know how crucial that is at the moment, not to single anyone out in particular. It's been wonderful to welcome Hara, our first GM, iwi Partnerships. I'd also like to thank our mana whenua representatives who've contributed so incredibly this year, particularly Kim Tahiwi, our hardest working, arguably, mana whenua representative. And with that, I would like to invite Kim to do the council blessing for us today.
Kia ora. If I may, I might just do a quick alternative karakia. Kia ora tātai, whakataka te hau ki tūru, whakataka te hau ki te... Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hia ki ana, te ātākora, he tika, he teo, he hauhu. Tihei mauri ora. Oh, missed that one.
Kia ora, Kim. Thank you so much. So we move on to apologies. We have one today from Andre Baker. Are there any further apologies? I'll ask somebody to move that apology. Moved by Councillor Kirby, seconded by Councillor Hanford. All in favour, please say aye. Aye, that's carried. Any declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda? Mr Manson.
Yes, Madam Mayor, as a submitter on 10.6, I will not be, as is the convention for people who submit, addressing this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mansell. We'll note that. We have nothing under 5, nothing under 6. So we move to public speaking time for items relating to the agenda, and we have the esteemed David Ogden coming to speak to us on the Older Persons Housing Review. If you just make your way to the table and press the button on the right. And you have 3 minutes, followed by questions.
This one record, does it? Kia ora. I wish to speak about 2 things, Madam Chair. The housing for the older persons' interest. As you can see, I'm older. And also grey power in my hair. And the other thing I want to talk about is rates, with your kindness. First of all, I want to say kia ora. I think, in passing, I think this is one of the mistakes of the current new government with their different view on te reo. I think it's the work that's been done by the previous government was good. And it's interesting that just digressing for 1 second or 2, that Te Papa did not have the correct translation of the Te Reti on the wall, and their arguments were quite puny and infantile, or incorrect, I should say. So the election, if I may say, apart from the te reo, I think what I found out about, for example, our wonderful Green Party is that they're a group of socialists who followed the Labour Party hoping to get power, but I think if they were more idealists, Councillor Sophie, they would be in the crossbenches at the moment. So it's something to think about for the future. I haven't been to the meetings this year, Madam Chair, because I'm a chartered accountant with my own business affiliated with another company. And I took on a new client, which was very difficult. And that has taken up a lot of my time and energy. We've solved that particular problem. So I'm here now. So I went to the Grey Power Committee meeting the other day and said, I'm going to go to meetings now. I'll go in my own volition, in my own name. They said, no, we've got something that we want you to be the voice for us on, and that is rates. And I'll allude to that briefly. I think the words that can be best described, the feeling of the committee was that this council is failing in the control of rates. And it's something it's just everywhere in the council. In the councils of this country, they think, oh, we cannot overcome that. I had a history with a council where we got the rates down to 2.5%, which was then the rate of inflation, plus 0.5%. We got the debt down to about 60 million. Now, that particular council cannot borrow because it's borrowed beyond its limit, and the Standard & Poor's people are of that opinion. So I would put the challenge to you that the older people of this particular district want their rates kept lower, and I'm thinking you'll find that some of you won't be elected, and we all want to be re-elected, I'm sure you do. But one of the things that you're here for is to provide for the older people.
Point of order.
For the older people who's...
Sorry, Mr Ogden, as you know, a point of order means we stop and consider...
Yes, I know, but I know what Councillor Martindale is going to say.
So,
Point of order with regards to what's being talked to here. This is supposed to be 8 items in relation to the agenda. We've had public speaking time. I'm more than happy to listen to items that are in direct relation to our agenda items. This isn't one of them.
yeah,
Well, Councillor Martindale, I've tried to deal with him, but he hasn't answered phone calls, as a number of people have. I'm sorry.
I'd remind Mr Ogden that we treat each other with respect in this council chamber, and I don't find that last comment very respectful. I have that you're talking to the older person's housing review, which is on the agenda, and you're actually running out of your time limit as well. So maybe if you moved on to that subject now, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, housing is one of the problems of this particular nation. I've looked at the paper, and the papers about housing have been very good that you've produced. My suggestion to you, Madam Chair, and this council and the officers is that you do not invest much money in housing, but that you seek to set up a partnership with government. We could put you could put 100 million in, but you'd have only, say, 200 houses, which will not solve the problem. I suggest to you that you seek government partnership and something like what is called the State Advances Corporation, where there was money lent at about 2% to various bodies. And also, I'm mindful of Mayor Kerry Prendergast. They got about 180 million for the government of the day for their housing for people who need it in Wellington City. So my suggestion to you is that you do not spend money in that way, but that you work in partnership. And for an example, in a bleak way, maybe to get someone like Ryman's to run your housing for you. I've seen other bodies take an interest in acquiring pensioner housing, like the Sisters of Mercy, I think their name is, in Upper Hutt. They acquired stock like that, and it gradually suited their purposes. But Ryman's are used to running.
Mr Ogden, your time has run out.
Well, you
so
don't
could
give us
wrap
enough
up,
time,
please.
but I accept your ruling, and I'll go.
Any questions for Mr Ogden? Councillor Coe.
I'd just like to say, David, I'm happy to come and talk to you about rates anytime, and to Grey Power.
Okay.
Thank you for that offer, Councillor Coe.
Well, Grey Power is supposed to be advocacy group.
Any other
Thank you
questions
very
or
much.
comments? Thank you for taking the time to come in and talk to us today. And certainly your comments around older persons housing well received, and we'll take them into consideration when we move to that item on the agenda. Thank you so much. Welcome Hurawai, Paki, Ngāti Toa representative who's just joined us online. So we move on to members' business. Any leave of absences? You can always inform the Mayor's office. We'll make sure there's a quorum of people around over the summer break, should anything transpire during that period. Matters of an urgent nature, there is one, but we're going to consider that later in the agenda and public excluded. Mayor's report, you have a list of mayoral activities there in front of you, councillors. You can have a look at that and ask me any questions at your leisure. So move on to reports. Representation review approach. Steffi and Hara? Sarah. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we have Dale Ossowski from Election Services online. So Dale, just welcome, and Dale is online to assist in responding to any technical questions or advice that might be sought in relation to this report. So just in summary, so the report in front of you presents you with an approach to the representation review for that essentially commences now and for 2024, and asks you to approve a process for preliminary community engagement and development of the initial proposal for the representation review. The recommendation presented by staff is to approve a staff-led approach to managing this in view of council having recently undertaken a thorough representation review in 2021. But there is another option in the report, as you will have seen, relating to the option to establish an independent panel to lead that preliminary engagement and development of the proposal, and that would involve the panel working with staff in any case. So just to recap on some of the questions that I understand have arisen. So council recently resolved to establish a Māori ward. That decision needed to happen before 23rd of November if it was to take effect ahead of the 25 local body elections. Council resolved to establish a Māori ward. That then triggers the representation review underway, and under the Local Electoral Act, there isn't currently a discretion to change that decision at this point in time. So essentially, there's no mechanism for that for any change in light of the recent coalition commitments. It's currently unknown what impact that might have. So we have we're in the process where we're required to undertake a representation review. This report outlines the process for that and the timing, which, as you'll see, is quite tight. The initial proposal will need to be developed by June, July next year. And even with a streamlined process, there are some steps that need to be undertaken and some options worked up to fulfil the requirements. So that's all I'll say at this point. Happy to respond to any questions, or we might hand those to Dale, who's online.
Any questions? Councillor Wilson.
Yep. My understanding, and I wasn't here at the time, but the last time when council had the representation review, a substantial amount of what the council wanted as an outcome didn't happen. In fact, and a lot of it got the opposite, right? So council didn't want community boards and ended up getting an extra one. I'm just wondering about, and fantastic and well received by the public. I'm just wondering about. We all have a vested interest in trying to keep the cost of this as low as possible, and I'm just wondering about how accurate the the expectations will be. Because like I say last time, what council got compared to what it asked for was significantly different. So I guess the question is, in terms of the deviation from a previous application, if you like, so that because if council had a mind to, it could go and revisit some of that stuff, and I wouldn't like to think that that's the case. So this is really about a Maori ward, right? And so the question is that where the hyper focus is, or is there a mind to go broader? Because it offers that opportunity if you wanted to. There's also the what you do around on the assumption that there will be a Maori ward, that would then give you a couple of interesting questions, whether you increase the size of your council or you decrease the size of your current councillors, notwithstanding lunch. So yeah, those questions as well. Now, if that's a staff-led proposal, then that could get interesting. So I'd be happy to, if the Chief Executive might want to weigh in at some stage. No buses come in or anything, but just so you've got a general tenor of where I'm coming from. And I think others might as well.
Chief Executive.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Always good questions. Similar to you, I wasn't here with the last rep review. What I can say though is that we have had a clear indication from this council as to what the expectation of a rep review looks like, and whilst it might be an opportunity to go fishing, that is not the intent of this review. We are looking at something very specific. I understand there may be a couple of small tidy up things that are hangovers from the previous review, but other than that, it is not our intention to make this bigger than it needs to be. And Sarah, you may want to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that would be one of the options that would be on the table, presumably would be on the table. Ultimately, this is, for the initial proposal, which is then there's consultation with the community. The community will tell you what they think about the initial proposal, and then you adopt a final proposal. So ultimately, both of those decisions are council decisions. So council has, it's not, regardless of whether it's staff-led or whether the preliminary engagement is led by an independent panel, you make the decision on all aspects of the process. In terms of your question about the Māori ward and number of councillors, we ran the numbers after initial discussions in the context of the Māori ward decision, and to establish one Māori ward, you could maintain pretty much the same representation arrangements as you have at the moment. So the status quo looks like it would be an option. Again, there could be, I think most people around the table would know there are a few issues that have popped up around the representation arrangement that the Local Government Commission, because they ultimately made the decision on the arrangements that we have at the moment and did make some changes to Council's final proposal in 21. So there are some things that could be reconsidered if Council felt that was the right thing to do. But none of that needs to take time. So one option would be a streamlined process. There's always the option to go back to a clean slate and look at new representation arrangements. But certainly that isn't the approach that you need to take. Also, just with the last representation review, Council took quite a thorough approach to the community engagement and quite a different approach, looking at trying to reach different voices in the across the district who we often don't hear from at council, and that really influenced the development of the options that were put up for the initial proposal and ultimately adopted by council. Council heard quite different things from the community as part of the formal consultation, which is why council changed the decision, and then again the Local Government Commission made a different decision. The process is the process, and that will be under the current legislation. That is, there are certain things boxes that will need to be ticked, but I think there are opportunities to consider how the review went last time, and to take that into account and making sure that it's as streamlined and cost effective as possible in this review.
Thank you. Councillor Pavanov?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So just a couple of clarification points. So I was actually an elected or a councillor in the last triennium. So it was a staff-led process. It went out with a range of options, which included removing community boards. It went out to consultation, and there was an overwhelming response to retain community boards and to keep the Waikanae ward separate and a few other things. So in that instance, our consultation, yes, there is. Our consultation worked really well because that is what was generally accepted by this council. My question is, if so we are compelled to go down this process at present, if the government, the current government, introduces what they're saying they do in terms of a referendum, the results of this representation review will be null and void. Is that correct?
I don't think it is correct, but what I might do is, Dale, are you happy to respond to that question from Councillor Pravanov?
We'll just wait for Dale to unmute.
So we basically start a process, we need to finish it, even though it might have to be undone.
We'll just wait for the answer.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, so as Sarah said, the coalition statement is quite vague, and it does, however, specifically refer to a referendum held with the 2025 election. So depends if that varies in the detail that may fall out. But if that's the case, we hold a referendum in 2025. So basically, up until that election in 2025, everything stays the same. So council's resolve for Māori wards, it must undertake a representation review. It must then hold a poll, depending on legislative change, at the 2025 elections. And the outcome of that poll will determine 2028 and 2031 elections with regard to Māori wards. So I think, as Sarah has said, things must carry on under current legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that, but I'm just there are some other issues that are pickling on in the background. Thank you.
Councillor Kirby.
Kia ora, thank you. Just a quick question from me. If we go down the road of a staff-led, do we have staff capacity to do this well?
Yes, we've looked at how we would staff that, and we consider that we do have staff capacity to manage that well.
Okay. Is there other work that staff would have to drop to be able to enable that to happen?
Not with the arrangements that we've considered.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councillor Halliday.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. Two things. I just wanted to confirm. Just wanted to put it out there that just wanted to confirm that we're legislated bound now. We've made a decision with regards to representation review around the 23rd of November cut-off. So no matter what happens, we're legislatively bound to that as a process. Is that correct?
At present, yes.
Lovely, thank you. Sorry, just a clarity here. LEA as an acronym. What does it stand for?
Local Electoral Act.
Lovely, thank you. That's it.
Kim Tahiwi.
Kia ora. My question's just around, you've got a summary on page 13 and 14 about option A and option B, and option B seems to have some really good outcomes in it that would result from doing option B. So if we were to go, because I see that option A is the recommended, so if we were to go with option A, what is the plan for, because this is quite a politically charged topic, obviously, I just think that anyone leading this consultation engagement needs to be well supported by our iwi partnership team, because they are going to be the key in actually getting this engagement correct. And they will probably strengthen what that engagement looks like. So a couple of questions are, if we're going option A, what is the plan to include the iwi partnership team and as an extension of that entry into mana whenua's voice? And is that included in the thinking around capacity? Because I think that's going to be really critical for this engagement to go well, that we actually have a strong iwi partnership engagement and consultation process.
I might kick off and then hand to Hara. So thank you, Kim. So with option A and with option B, actually, because both would need to be supported by staff, the independent panel, if established, would need to be supported by staff to work up options that they're not able to do in terms of capacity of the panel. But with option A, we would look at establishing a cross-organisational project team like we did with the last rep review. That would need to have representation from our iwi partnerships team. And communications and engagement staff from the GIS team, staff that need to be involved in some of the technical details. So that would ensure that we have, at a staff level, we have that voice reflected in all of the work. I would just make the point as well that the main advantage of option B, as I see it, is it's really about perception. It's about avoiding perceptions of parochialism and staff interest in this. But in reality, staff need to act with political impartiality in the work that we do. So we're obliged to provide you with good advice that is founded on facts and on what we hear from the community. So it is really a matter of perception for the community. So I'll hand to you, Hara, in terms of capacity of the team.
Really good. Just on the capacity piece of the team, I've worked closely with Steffi in this process and Sarah. So capacity-wise, we would probably have to incorporate it into our work program, and something else would have less attention in terms of our work program at this stage. So, but that will be managed effectively so that we could deliver on this mahi that we've got in front of us with this rep review.
Just wait for the microphone to come back. Kim?
Just thank you. And probably just a small follow-up comment is that supporting this kaupapa, and because it's quite politically charged, but what it is, it's a really fundamental way of thinking, and it's really stamping our areas and our council and our rohes. It's stamping our foot in the ground and saying this is what we're about. So which is why I think I know we focus on funds and how much it's going to cost, but as a kaupapa that is really on the top of our numbers and we want to really focus on, this thing is a game changer. This is actually defining who we are as an area. So I would like to, just make sure in tautoko that the staff have our full support to carry out this engagement, and that they have our mana whenua full support to carry out the engagement. That's all.
Kim. Who's next? Mr. Mansell.
Thanks. A couple of questions. The first one's really easy. Is there any indication of cost, difference of cost between the two? And I'll let you answer that. But the second one's probably more important, is the matter of consultation. This house, it's not a house, this whare has decided that it will have a Maori wood. And when we consulted previously, numbers weren't big enough to sway members, and demographic issues were considered, with younger people having a greater sway than older people. When you go out to consultation, is there going to be any commentary around the use of the consultation? Because if you consult and then ignore, you actually need to have told people that, while you are the voice, you're only one part of our decision. Is there any plan for that sort of thing?
I might just answer your first question because that is the quick
The easy
one. So we've estimated that the cost difference probably is around 15K, which is really reimbursement of independent panel members, because there will be a staff cost regardless. Staff will need to be supporting the independent panel. So the cost difference is relatively small. In terms of the second question, Dale, would you like to speak to that question around consultation and decision making under the relevant acts?
Yes, as said earlier, preliminary informal consultation is not mandatory but highly recommended. So we would recommend that we do undertake some sort of preliminary consultation. I think the detail is yet to be determined in that, about how extensive. We know that that we must, for example, or should really consult with tangata whenua, with community boards, with the public in general. But that sort of detail is yet to be finalised once we proceed with the green light as to which option is to be followed.
So you're saying that there will be at least 2 lots of consultation? Oh, we've consulted already because there were submissions to the original paper. You're saying there's a preliminary consultation and then there'll be a 3rd consultation?
So when we undertake a representation arrangements review, there are 2 areas of formal consultation, which is submission period on your initial proposal and your objection period for your final proposal. So there's 2 formal areas, if you like, of each of about 6 weeks period. That's your formal process. Before we can get to an initial proposal, we would recommend some form of informal consultation to give us a steer. What is the community saying they want to see change, if anything? They might be saying we're happy with the status quo, which is then we can proceed with that feedback onto a recommendation for council about what should be adopted for your initial proposal.
That seems like a lot of consultation that
Yeah.
will be largely ignored.
Can I just add to that, maybe just clarify or just put in different words what Dale has said? So preliminary, the first stage, which would be early next year, isn't mandatory, but it could be as simple as a community survey to understand views of the community and how we should approach this to inform you on the initial proposal that you adopt. So it's different to a formal consultation that you're then required to take under the Local Electoral Act, where you receive formal submissions, you must consider them. You decide what you do with, as a council, you're able to say, well, while the majority of the community have this view, this is what we think is best for the best option for our community, taking into consideration the mandated things you need to consider, like there are numbers and there's effective representation, there's a number of things which are outlined in the report. So they're really, I think in terms of engagement and consultation, there's those 2 rounds, and then the appeals and objections is like any process. It's a bit different, isn't it? And that's you're not we receive the appeals and objections, we forward them to the Local Government Commission, and the Local Government Commission consider that part of the process. So that is that 3rd part that Dale has outlined. While it relates to the process, it is sort of separate, as with any kind of legal process.
Thank you. Just a small comment. I think the less time you ask people and then ignore them, the better. So if you can cut out one of the consultations, then please do.
So by approving this report today, I'll just a follow-up question from that, and then I'll go to Councillor Hanford. By passing these recommendations today, are we committing to that preliminary engagement process, which isn't mandatory, and we've decided to only do what's mandatory and do the minimum because we've already done a survey on a Māori ward and we've already just been through a representation review. So the message that we were giving staff is that we would want to do the minimum that's required.
Mm-hmm.
So any step that's not required is not something that we'd be pushing for. My question is, by moving these recommendations today, are we committing ourselves to that initial engagement?
So I think with the wording of the recommendation 1.2, as it reads, it does commit to doing that. The reason the recommendation is worded that way is that it is best practice to undertake some form of preliminary engagement, and it could be the form that that if you did decide to take a form of preliminary engagement, you'd be involved in deciding what that looks like and how involved it is or not involved, regardless of whether staff put the approach to you or an independent panel do. That being said, if your preference as a council is to not commit today, then what we could do is we could reword the recommendation to approve a staff-led approach to considering what preliminary community engagement may be needed, if any, and to explore, and then the rest reads, I think, as it is. So I think we could easily make that change to that recommendation if that fits with council's current thinking.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll finish off the questions and then we'll have a look at some alternative wording to just give us a bit more flexibility around that. And then I'm going to go in order. We can get clarity as we go. Councillor Hanford?
Hopefully a relatively quick question. So just in terms of the what you mentioned around potentially tinkering around the edges in terms of the representation arrangements that were agreed through the last review, would Emerald Glen and the re-inclusion of that into the Pakikerehiromati ward be something that is likely to come back to us as those kind of initial recommendations?
That is certainly something I was referring to that as one of the issues that you could consider, and staff, I think we could certainly take that into account, and any other issues that that council would like considered. And I think that in a way that would be part of the preliminary engagement, because not only you can decide whether you want to ask the community generally. There would also be a need to, I think, engage with mana whenua, particularly around the establishment of Māori ward. That's new. Council doesn't know. Well, I think it's fair to say that there could be there's a need to understand how mana whenua think that should be incorporated into the existing representation arrangements before options are worked up. And equally, understanding the views of councillors and of community board members and issues that may need to be addressed in the arrangements would be part of that preliminary process.
Cool. Thank you. Just wanted to double check that. So.
Councillor Wilson's already asked a question, so I'm just going to move on to Councillor Coford, and then we'll come back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Could we go down, just putting my threat and error management hat on, could we go down the legislative path for the next few years until the election, and the government repeal the Act just at the time of the election? And it could be quite confusing and messy then. And could we have a steer from central government before we go ahead? Could we call the process until we have a direct steer from them? Is that a fair question?
I'm not sure I entirely understand the second part of your question, but maybe if I just answer the first and then hand to Dale as well if he has any additional comments to make. As we've said, at present, there isn't. We don't know what any potential bill that will be introduced, that's been talked about being introduced, will look like. The legislation, as it stands, talks about the Māori ward being in effect for two elections of a local authority. So as it stands, the Māori ward is in place for the next elections and thereafter. That could change. There could be a requirement to carry out a referendum like they've committed, and maybe that would trigger a representation review in the next cycle. We really don't know because we haven't seen the legislation. So I think it's difficult to answer those questions without any more detail from the coalition government. Dale, did you have any additional comments on that?
Yes, we could try talking with Department of Internal Affairs or the new government, but I doubt whether there's going to be any more detail until early next year or at the earliest. So we could, I think, as I said earlier, I think we just have to soldier on under current legislation. I doubt whether there will be a removal, for example, of Māori wards prior to the 2025 election. So I think because it's in place for those councils that have it or have already committed to it, we must proceed and enact that or provide for that in 2025, have the referendum, which will then decide whether they will carry on for 2028 and 2031.
Thanks, Dale. So I'm just trying to identify a risk. There is a risk of doing all of this work and having it repealed at the wrong time.
Potentially, yes.
Thank you.
But government will have to take that into consideration if they suddenly change track halfway through a process. Kapiti is not the only one undertaking a representation review. There's a number of them doing that. So the consequences are quite significant right across the country.
Yes, I'm just thinking of the cost involved in that and the risk factor. So there is a risk factor with losing money on it for all the work we do. It's just the risk. It is there. Thank you.
Councillor Halliday.
As a point of clarity, actually, Madam Chair, with regards to Mr. Mansell's question, just clarifying, the consultation process we go to, it's not about a Māori ward. That decision's been made. This is a representational review, and the consultation will be around the representational arrangement for the district. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, not whether to establish, but you will consider what it looks like, what the Māori ward looks like in the context of the district's
And potentially boundaries and
representation
other things as
arrangements.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Councillor Warwick.
How binding is the consultation if it's a legal requirement? Because we keep, like Richard said, not doing what people ask us to, and communicating that fact that actually we're not asking about a Māori ward, it's about how it will look. That's quite important, so people don't have the option of saying no.
The formal consultation process is binding for you to go through. So you have obligations to consider submissions, etc. Go through a process in hearing what people have to say. You then have discretion to decide how to take that feedback into account. So you're required to turn your mind to it, but you're not required to do the things that are outlined in the submission.
So it's non-binding. Councillor Cooper.
It occurs to me that that first round of consultation is actually quite vital then. I would have thought that our consultation will be heavily targeted towards the people who are going to be impacted or who are going to be involved in the process, which is our Māori communities, those who will eventually be on the Māori roll in voting. So if our second round of consultation is binding, wouldn't we want to use that first round of consultation to inform us moving forward? So it's actually quite critical.
The formal process isn't binding, but the preliminary engagement process, so leading up to the initial proposal options, I think that the point that I just heard is, do we want to, is it helpful to do preliminary engagement so that the options, reflect what we think the community want and then lead into the formal consultation and the final proposal? I think that's why the Local Government Commission recommend it as good practice. But that's up to you, considering all the things, the fact that we've just done a representation review, we have heard from the community, we've heard the consultation, we haven't heard from the community about the Māori ward aspect of it, so that really is something that is new. So that is really a decision for you as a council.
And just my comment to that would be the consultation would be laser focused on how Māori predominantly want this to look. So it's actually critical, I think, to proceed with that first round of consultation, because we have to work on the assumption that we're moving forward. We can't work on the assumption it's going to can, because it might not. Then we've half-assed it. We want to do it properly.
And you can, like I said before, you can really decide, if you do decide to do preliminary engagement, you could be really targeted in what you do, engaging with mana whenua, engaging with Māori. You could do limited if you were to decide to do that. Some level of preliminary engagement was important.
Yep, that's my view. Thank you. I agree.
Councillor Pravanov.
Yeah, so thank you. I have a couple of questions. So in terms of the preliminary engagement, so last time that was done, and when the formal consultation was done, the output, the difference was very, very different. So my question is, are we going to have, as councillors, input into how that preliminary consultation is managed and run? my first question.
So are you saying in terms of the independent panel, how do you provide councillor input into that preliminary consultation? Sorry.
Yeah, so with the preliminary investigation and consultation last time, it was done by an outsourced group and a targeted subset of our community. The results came back. That's what ended up going out in our draft consultation, and when the results came in, it was very, very different. And so we don't really want to have a similar type of situation. You know, we want to have that preliminary investigation or that preliminary consultation to be as well aligned to what our community is thinking. So my question is, what part do we play in that being set up?
So your point, yeah, targeted engagement, like the form undertaken through empathetic design last time, is a particular approach, and it also is, you know, there's a cost associated with that type of engagement. I've heard from council that cost is a factor that you're wanting to consider in keeping the cost down. So regardless of whether it's a staff-led process or an independent panel-led process, we will come back to you with what we're planning to do. We'll present a report in the new year, and you can then go, yes, this sounds right.
Okay, thank you. So my second question is, if there are some tweaks included in this representation review, along with, I suppose, the setup of our elected members, those tweaks will stay regardless of whether or not a referendum is required further down the line for Māori wards?
The representation arrangements adopted through this process, if there is no change in legislation in the interim, will be in effect for the next elections.
Yes.
And then we, and if there's no change to the Māori ward, probably the elections thereafter. But we're now into unknown space. So I think it's likely that these representation arrangements will be in effect for the 25 elections.
So my question is, what happens if there's a requirement for a referendum? Do the tweaks that would occurred, which are not to do with the Māori ward, will they still remain as a result of?
Yes, or anything that's the final representation arrangements that are either decided on by you, or if it's referred to the local government commission, which is quite likely that they decide on, that'll be what's in effect, including any tweaks. But there is an element of unknown in terms of the impact of any proposed legislation from the coalition government.
It's not quite what I'm after, but anyway, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Kim Tahiri.
Kia ora. My question is a follow-up on the preliminary engagement as well. My original question, I think it's been kind of asked by Councillor Cooper, but it's around what impact would not having the preliminary engagement have on the process, because I note that it's in line 52 or point 52, it says the full cost is between 240 and 300k, and that includes a preliminary consultation. So what's the cost benefit? So if the preliminary engagement is say 20k, but the benefit of it is huge, what's the cost benefit, do you know, of not having it? So what are we going to miss out on not having that preliminary engagement? Because I think it's really critical that because we've already had this consultation, that we seem to be actually asking the community again and really going over it, because it's such an important topic. Like I said, it's an actual game changer on us taking a stand on what we want in our community. So I do think it's important, and if it costs 10k, why wouldn't you, if the benefit of it is huge? So is there any thoughts on that?
So we haven't factored in significant cost relating to preliminary and community engagement. The main cost factored into the budget that you see is relating to the formal consultation process, because there's quite a bit of work involved in that, and a need to work with a company to analyse the submissions. Steffi, do you have the number off the top around preliminary engagement? Or I'm thinking it's in the vicinity of like 20k. It's insignificant, and if you did a community survey, the main cost to the preliminary engagement would be staff support, which is part of the whole process anyway. So, yeah, and yeah.
So I'll just expand on that in terms of that
preliminary engagement on its own, and tweaking what we've got as a recommendation, if that's where we're going to land, is that we will have to do engagement with mana whenua on this anyway. So even if it's not in the recommendation, and expanding on Councillor Cooper's comment, is that we will have to engage mana whenua anyway in this process. So we won't know costings until we pass the recommendation, if it's going to be a targeted group. That's the right word, probably not. Sorry.
And just to follow up is about, you mentioned option B was largely about perception, and so if I'm thinking, well, not me personally, but if we're thinking no preliminary engagement to actually understand what the community wants, then the perception of that is that we're not giving a voice to the community, in my eyes. And if we take that first submissions approach, just noting that that was a very small amount of our community that we heard from. So, yeah, and this would be quite a larger, more dedicated approach.
So yeah, just going, yeah, I agree, but going back to that main point, and that the fact that we have to engage, and I correct what I just said, it's not just mana whenua alone, it'll be those on the Māori roll, because it's important to them. So that's what will be taken into consideration when we talk about the engagement on this kaupapa.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, I'm sort of not quite sure now about this preliminary engagement thing. One of the things, there has been a form of preliminary engagement, if you like, that was done. Wasn't done well, but it was done. For me, the trickiest part of this is about managing expectations, and that there will be, and Dale, correct me if I'm wrong here, but there will be a Maori ward in Kapiti at the next election. Now, if a referendum was to come in, that could impact 2028, but not 2025. So if there will be a Maori ward, there will be an election, someone will get elected, and regardless of what a referendum, if a referendum was to occur at the same time, that wouldn't mean that person stands down, right? That means they are a councillor for the next 3 years at least. Is that correct, Dale?
That's correct. And then if you have a referendum in 2025, the outcome of that will apply for 2028 elections.
That's right, in which case there could be a change of government, and then we could go through the circus again. So, yeah, so for me, it's really important that we make it clear that a decision has been made. It's not a survey, it's not a referendum. You can submit all you like that you don't want it, but it's happening, right? So, yeah, and that's, I think this is the point that Richard was making, and it's the point that Glenn's made as well. And that is, we don't want the public thinking that they can influence a decision that has already been made. That would be disingenuous. You make a decision, you own it, right? So the consultation has to be completely genuine. And there are two lots of consultation here, really. One is about the Maori ward, which is that's the guts of this thing, right? So there's a process for that, and I think Hara's already stepped out what the important part of that process is. But if there's any other tweaks at all, whether it be doubling the size of the Paikokariki ward, whatever it happens to be, I don't know how many people live out there now. Yeah, about 40 people, yeah, doubling the size of Paikokariki. But then that requires a full consultation, doesn't it, with everybody? Or does that, if something's just ward specific, are you still obliged to go and talk to everybody? Yeah.
Yeah, the consultation that's required is the same regardless of what the changes are to the representation arrangements. Yeah.
Oh, great. That's actually been not just some really good questions, but also some initial sharing of some thoughts, which I think is a positive thing as we decide on next steps. Based on what I've heard, I think I'll just ask if anybody around the table is of a mind to move the recommendations as they stand, either so A and either B, which is option A, or C, which is option B.
I'm happy to move A.
A, so we'll start with A. Do I have a seconder for A? Councillor Kirby. Right of introduction. So that's that the council approved the proposed representation review approach.
Yeah, and I think
associated timelines.
Yeah, and I think it seems like a really genuine option that we can consult as we need to consult without raising any sort of silly expectations. In terms of cost benefit, that seems to be the best one again. So we do have to be cognizant of the costs.
So I'm just
of these things.
clarifying. So you're moving A and B option A. Is that what? So it's a little bit confusing how the recommendations
Dr.
are.
Zeus.
So there's A, that the council approved the proposed representation review. Should we just start with that, and then we'll go on to either option A or option B next? So this is A on page 6 of the agenda.
Yeah, so I'll move that.
That council approved, I'll read it out just so we're clear, that council approved the proposed representation review approach outlined in the paper and associated timelines, noting that timeframes are mandated by legislation, and approved the proposed preliminary community engagement process. So that's what's been moved and seconded.
Yep.
So that's what we're debating right now, and then we'll go on to either option A or option B after that. Yep.
I'm happy to waive the introduction. It's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's been moved and seconded. Any further debate on that first recommendation? Yep. Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think we could have done them both together, so I'm just going to do my one debate rather than do it in the next one as well. But look, I just wanted to say...
no, we're only debating A right now.
Correct.
And then we'll move either option A or option B.
Oh, no, I get that. Yeah, no, I thought we'd be... Yeah. So, look, this is a process. The initial consultation last time was insightful as it approached people that don't usually engage. It was actually very, very interesting. As, for example, it talked to doing away with community boards. I note Councillor Wilson's comment that what we got was different than what we asked. Actually, I'm a little bit tired of hearing this because we had to suck it up through the election process. So to be clear, we took on board the initial consultation. We decided to go fishing as we knew the general community would disagree. And it did, but we challenged the community, and that was, in my opinion, done purposefully. We got 500 submissions and incorporated them into our proposal to the Local Government Commission. We actually got exactly what we intended to get, and look at the outcome. The issue that came back was around boundaries, and it was around the plus or minus 10% rule. And I can assure you all, you might not understand what that plus or minus 10% rule is now, but you certainly will by the end of the process, because it's quite interesting, and it's quite interesting how it impacts on things. So we're in a process, and it is what it is with regards to things. And I note that we're looking at streamlining this and using as much of the information, because we went through a very robust process last time. It's a 6-year cycle. We're bringing it forward 3 years, but it is a cyclic thing. And I'm glad that at least through this process, if the representational review and how it incorporates Māori Ward is actually going to stand for at least 3 years, and we'll see what happens on the other side of that.
Any further debate? Bede, Larison.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thought I'd just add a comment. I'm not sure if people are aware, but I submitted on the last representation review. So I just thought I might share a little bit about what was involved there, just to highlight the two processes. So there was the preliminary and the secondary. The proposal from recollection to disestablish community boards didn't come till the second round. So looking at my two submissions, the first one was fairly conceptual. The second one was much more technical. So I think that two-stage process was really useful. But had that proposal to disestablish the community boards not been in a preliminary or not been sort of as part of the process, it might not have been clear. We may not have been prepared enough to actually consult, to engage, to communicate our disapproval of that clearly enough and thoroughly enough. And I think as a submitter, it was extraordinarily valuable to have that series of engagement to work through the processes of something that's quite significant and quite big. And certainly appreciated the effort that council put into having that process. Even if I didn't like the answer that you tried to push, it was still a very valuable process. Thank you.
Thank you for that insight. So that's been moved and seconded. I'll put that to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. That's carried. So now we move on to Councillor Wilson has indicated he'd like to move B, which is option A.
Yeah, B.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Kirby. Right of introduction. So
Well-
this is approve a staff-led community engagement process to inform recommendations for initial representation arrangement proposal to council. Consideration no later than 31st of July 2024.
Yeah, pretty much what I said earlier. This is the most cost-effective. In terms of representation review, most of the heavy lifting was done by the last council. This isn't really going to be about a decision because the decision's been made. Last time it really was about a decision. You were deciding, to have community boards or not have them. We've already made the decision about what we want, notwithstanding the Emerald Green? Yeah, Emerald Green. At this stage, saving ratepayers as much money as we can, given that we are inside a process, and it seems that option A allows for the full and proper consultation that would be required with mana whenua, and those on the Maori roll, that will involve a bit of research, I would think, as well. So, yep, happy to move it.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Any further debate?
I'm all about saving.
I've got Councillor Kirby.
Yeah, I support, and the reason I've seconded this is support Nigel's, Councillor Wilson's comments in regards to the cost and this being the most efficient. The second thing that I'd just make an observation in regards to this is that we are really clear this is about representation across the district and how that is made up, not just about a Māori ward or not. I think that has to be really clearly through all of our engagement with the community that is the underlying thing. This is about the whole representation that goes on from our district sitting at this table. So.
Kim Tahiwi.
Kia ora, yes, I agree, and we need to make that very clear. However, realistically, people are going to tag this to the Māori ward. So, if I'm thinking about Te Urahi, I'm thinking that we need to be really supportive of our staff-led initiative because they will bear the brunt of this. And I think our iwi partnership needs to be really in the middle of this to support the rest of the staff and be able to take the lead because it's going to be it is a political football right now, just as Te Urahi was. And we need to make sure that our staff that are doing this stuff are actually supported and kept safe in that space. So that's all really I have to say.
Kia ora, Kim. Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair. Look, it's a very good point, Kim. Very, very good point. And thank you for bringing it up. Just wanted to voice my support of the words Councillor Wilson. And I'll be supporting this recommendation as well. Thank you.
Right of reply?
Yeah, just quickly, to touch on what Kim was saying. This is a highly charged environment that we are about to get into. I'm really concerned about the safety of people involved in this process as well. And that's why in this situation, I think a staff-led process as opposed to a panel is better. And it's the cheaper option that will give us what it is that we want to achieve.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. I'll put that to the vote. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. We're going to actually take a short break now because some of us have been here for public forum and we didn't have a break in between. So we'll come back at 5:02.